So my name is Heather Meadows-Adamson. I'm a premium tutor here at Applerouth. Tonight's presentation is SAT 101. This presentation, we talk a little bit about what's in the test. We do go a little bit into some example questions. So just keep that in mind. If your students nearby, that could be fun, could be useful for them to watch. But yeah, we're going to talk about what's kind of on the test, the format, some example questions to tell you more about what's on it. And then we can talk more generally about the testing world and stuff. I will leave time for questions at the end. So I just ask that you hold most of your questions until the end. A lot of the technical ones, hopefully I'm able to answer while we go through the presentation. But let's get started. Excuse me, I'm also getting over a cold. Sorry about that. So today we're going to talk about what the SAT is. We're also going to talk a little bit about test anxiety. We're going to do some overall tips and strategies. That's again, we're going to kind of walk through some of the questions and talk about ways to approach them. We'll talk about test day, and then we'll also talk about the digital SAT changes at the end pretty briefly. So to start with the SAT, right? So the SAT is going to have 4 sections, reading, writing, and then 2 math, 1 without calculator, 1 with. You'll notice some of these sections are pretty long, especially the first and last one. So that is one thing the SAT does give you a good bit of time for a lot of the questions. You'll learn that obviously they are a little more complex sometimes too, though. Sometimes you do need that time. So in comparison to the ACT is a really fast-paced test, but the questions aren't as complex in the same way. So this is one of the big differences here. So scoring goes like this. You can get between a 200 and an 800 on the math sections. The reading and writing sections are combined 200 to 800. Total score you can get is 1,600. So often if you hear people say like, I got an 1,100, those are those 2 pieces combined. Of course, it's important to make sure that your scores are balanced, right? We don't want to see like an 800 English and writing and like a 500 math, right? It's not too great. We want to make sure they're pretty balanced. Of course, most students are just stronger in one section over the other, which is totally fine, but you don't want to make sure there's anything crazy going on there. So the first tip is not to leave anything blank, right? There's no penalty for wrong answers on the SAT. So if you guess, you have a 1 in 4 chance of getting it right. And if you're able to narrow down the answers, that's even better, right? This comes from the old SAT. So the SAT pre-2016 used to have a guessing penalty, but that's no longer a thing. So I would just like to go ahead and get rid of that rumor. And another tip is that if you run out of time and you have a block of questions left at the end of a section, you want to make sure you're picking just one answer, A, B, C, or D, and just going with that answer straight down. We don't really want to Christmas tree it. Statistics has found that if you Christmas tree it, you're more likely to miss the correct answer every time. If you just pick one, then you have a more solid chance of getting at least those correct. So again, make sure you're filling out the whole test. What's a good score? You're not gonna like my answer, there's no such thing. For the SAT, a good score is a score that gets you into the college that you want, right? Whoops, sorry. So, you want to make sure that you're aware of what those colleges need, right? Something I really recommend is, whatever school you're interested in. I'm just going to say UGA, that's where I went, UGA. You're going to go into Google, you're going to put in UGA freshman profile, again, or whatever school you're looking for. And so what happens is a lot of colleges really like to brag about their most recently admitted freshman class. And so most schools will have a dedicated web page to just stats about their freshman class. And it can be fun stuff like how many people, how many females, how many males, how many countries they're from. But it's also going to have stuff that's helpful on there like GPA and SAT, ACT scores. So my recommendation is you're not sure where to start with those colleges is to find this page on their website and see what those numbers are, right? Usually they'll give you a range and you want to be somewhere within that range comfortably, right? So again, if you're not sure where in the world that would be, this is a really good tool to use to kind of get an idea. And for most families, what I recommend is, having a shared Google Doc or a spreadsheet or even just a notebook on the dinner table that just keeps track of this stuff, list all the schools you're interested in, write down all these numbers, right? So you kind of see where do I place within all of these. All right, so now that you know that, right, a lot of students experience test anxiety too, so I felt this was kind of good to talk about when we're talking about the SAT specifically today. So what is test anxiety? 61% of high school students reported suffering from some test anxiety at least some of the time, and almost 1/4 were afflicted almost always. So a little bit of stress is good, right? Just a little bit, but you don't want it to overwhelm you and control you. So this is the idea that a little bit of stress, right? You know something's important, so you're a little worried about it, but just in the way that you're like, I feel pressure to do well, and I have gone out of my way to do extra practice, and I'm a little nervous, but I'm ready for it. That's this middle kind of thing of eustress, right? Eustress is what helps us focus and understand this is serious, right? We don't want to be too relaxed going into the test day, right? That kind of almost seems like you're not prepared. But when it goes into the distress range is when it starts to really negatively impact what's going on there. So you want to make sure you're not letting that control you, right? Because you want to be able to do your best without this standing in your way. So a couple strategies: focus on the familiar, right? Familiarity lowers your stress levels because the unknown is scary. Practice problems and practice tests really help build your endurance and expose you to the test, right? So simply by taking a practice test, you not only, simple stuff, right? Like, what does the test booklet look like, right? What do the reading passages look like, right? Which seems a little bit silly, but just even being familiar with that is helpful. You know where to find things. And just being able to sit through the 3-hour test and say, okay, I know what sitting through a test like that is, right? So all this is really important. Practice tests really help. Also, taking the SAT more than once is helpful as well, right? So that first time you take the official test, excuse me, everyone. The first time you take that official test, right, might be a little bit nerve-wracking, right? Because it feels pretty serious. You have to show your ID to get in and stuff. So taking a test more than once is totally fine. And sometimes that can help, right? Sometimes the second time you take it, you know how the process works. You're a little more relaxed. Then on the morning of the test, make sure you keep to a normal schedule, right? Don't disrupt your normal routine there. Don't do anything extra crazy. So kind of after talking about that, let's dive into what is in the test itself, right? So we're also going to add a little bit of strategies and tips here, just because that's a little bit nice to hear, right? For some of you guys who may be taking the test coming up. So one thing we like to encourage is active reading, which is kind of underlining and annotating the paper, right? So you want to make sure you're underlining key ideas, circling change words, starring main ideas, and writing summaries, right? This is a great skill to have there. So we'll skip this part. Sorry, y'all. So kind of an example of what it would look like. Right, so we won't go through the whole thing today, but the idea is you want to underline about 30% of the passage. And what that does is that kind of helps you, minimize the passage and see what's in your, what's all going to be asked about, right? So a lot of students are familiar with this. They're doing this in their English classes already. So this is something good you just want to bring over into the SAT, right? So something else you may see on the test is comparison passages. So there's gonna be one of these per test. And so they look a little bit like this, right? Again, knowing what they look like is helpful. Say passage 1 and passage 2. The best strategy for these is just to take them one at a time, right? So read one, then answer the questions about that one, then read the next one and answer the questions about that one. Oops, sorry, I'm having a little bit of freezing going on there. But the reading section overall, right, we're going to see different passages from different categories. So we'll see things about like grammar, using like commas, punctuation, things like that. So it's always good to brush up on. You want to make sure you're kind of aware of what they expect there too, right? Which is where practice tests really help too. Or I'm sorry, I'm talking about the writing section. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. Sorry about that. So with the reading section, I'm sorry, you're going to see different categories, like historical passages, science passages, literature passages. So being familiar with the types of categories you'll see there will help you out a lot too. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So the writing section. The writing section is the second one. This one's going to go over the grammar, as I was saying, right? So punctuation, standard English convention rules. It's also going to ask a little bit about like style. But from there, again, you kind of can feel like what they really want most of all is a clear and concise writing, right? So the biggest thing in this section is to trust your ear, right? Most of you are probably native English speakers. So if something sounds wrong, it probably is, right? Trust yourself on that one. I think what a lot of students do is they overthink that section. Next thing is to find the rule, right? What's really helpful here is to figure out what concept's being tested in the first place. So is this question about punctuation? Is this question about pronouns? Is it about redundancy, right? By doing that, you kind of set yourself up to be more aware of, what rule you need to remember, right? You need to focus on here in this sentence. So that's usually really helpful there. Some examples of what you could see, right? Some punctuation stuff, right? There are a few key marks that are really helpful. So commas go between independent and dependent clause. A period and semicolon go between two independents. A colon really introduces something like a list or a clarification. And then two dashes kind of separate additional information. So again, this is just an example of like the kind of grammar rules you'll need to know to kind of work through the test itself. So to kind of see what that looks like, right? So you see, you'll have a passage, you'll have certain sections underlined within that passage. And then you'll be asked to choose the correct grammar sections from each of these, right? And so you can see here, right, we know these are grammar questions. If you look here, none of the words are being changed. It's simply the punctuation. So then we need to decide, what kind of punctuation do we need for each situation here? We'll go through these today, but to kind of give you an idea what that looks like and how that would look for you guys taking the test here. So the next kind of question you'll see is expression of ideas. So these are the second type I was talking about earlier, not necessarily about style, I suppose, more of rhetorical expression. They ask you to improve the quality of sentences on paragraphs, maybe ask to combine sentences, reorder them so they make more sense, add something or delete something. And again, here, if we can identify the goal of the question by reading carefully, we can really focus on figuring out what it's asking in the first place. And again, we want to focus on the question itself. So to kind of see what that looks like, here's an example. So in this situation, we have a sentence, and then the question right here is a second block of text. At this point, the writer wants to further develop the idea from the preceding sentence. Okay, so our goal here is to further develop the idea, so to continue talking about the same thing, right? So sometimes kind of getting used to the way they ask questions is important for this section, right? Knowing that that phrasing means continue talk about the same thing, right? And again, this is where practice tests and practice questions can really help, because as you get more familiar with the way they ask questions, you're not as surprised, you know kind of what to expect from those. Okay, won't worry going too much detail with this guy. And so now kind of moving on to the math section, right? So again, we're talking about, what kind of stuff you're going to see in this math section. So really, the math section features word problems heavily. Your first challenge is to turn them into math. So the SAT is actually testing something called math fluency. So math fluency is where you are presented with a problem, like a real world problem or just a situation, and you first create the math and then you have to solve that math. So as opposed to being given a situation and so a word problem with equation to solve, you're just given the word problem, you have to write your own equations and then solve those guys. So it really changes it here. So you'll need to be an active reader, right? Kind of doing the same thing we talked about earlier, underlining things, checking to see if there are multiple steps, checking to see if there's any answer restrictions, right? So sometimes they'll ask you just for a positive solution or just for a whole number solution as well, right? So we want to think about, what can I eliminate, right? Even if you get stuck on this section, a good thing is to at least eliminate based on the problem and based on the parameters they've given you. And then from there, hopefully we can, work backwards or plug in or something. Something important to remember in the math section on here is that no one's checking your work, right? This is not a test in school where you are like making sure you're doing all the steps the way you're supposed to be doing it, right? This is where we are really just focusing on getting the correct answer at the end of the day. So however you get that answer, whether you're plugging and chugging, you're guessing and checking, working backwards, or doing it algebraically, no matter what, right? We want to make sure that you are just getting the answer at the end of the day. It can be messy, right? We just want to get to the end. So one of the first strategies, right, is working backwards, right? So we can get a word problem here where they give us some parameters about how much you need to spend per comic book, right? And working backwards is a great way, right? So we kind of look here, right? We can solve this algebraically as possible, but we can also work backwards. So we can choose choice C, right? Let's plug it in. That answer ends up being too big. Let's try another one. B, that works, right? So again, this will be in like the calculator section, so it's easy to kind of plug and chug and use your calculator and get through this one pretty quickly. So working backwards is totally a valid strategy here too. A little bit easier in the calculator section, of course. Some other stuff you may see are percentages, right? This also lets us talk about the grid-in questions. So the grid-in questions in the math section come at the end of each part, the no calc and the calc. And what those do is instead of having multiple choice, you are just supposed to input your answer into like a little box. They're a little bit different, obviously. So there's nothing to work backwards from, unfortunately. You can still guess and check, I suppose, but it's a little bit more kind of blindly, right? These, I will say too, don't leave these blank, right? I know it's not as easy as like the multiple choice answers where you can just choose B or something. But for the grid-in questions at the end, you can always put in a number. I know it feels a little silly, but just pick a number and put it in. Pick a simple number like 2 or something. So whenever you don't know the answer, you can pick 2. Or you can pick something that makes sense to the question, right? Like, it has to be bigger than 60, so pick 63. But yeah, don't be afraid for guessing in these two if you have trouble or run out of time. So percentages, speaking of what something you need to work on. So we want to make sure we're actually looking at this. And this is a good example of how we can use proportions, right? Proportions are really helpful, especially in percentage questions and a lot of word problems too. So for this question, we want to figure out what's 15% less than the predicted weight, right? So what we can do here is we can do a proportion and figure out a percentage from there. This one we could also do algebraically, right? There's so many different ways to solve all these questions. Again, the biggest thing is how do you get the answer at the end of the day? And do a quick cross multiply from there. Probability is also something you'll see on the test. So it doesn't come up super often, but a little bit out of nowhere, right? Probability is often one of those topics that your student is taught like at the end of the year. So it often takes a little bit of refreshing to get back to. So here we want to make sure we're just focusing on what the question is asking, right, at the end of the day. So the question says, of students who made an 80 or higher on this test, how many of them attended the review sessions, right? So we just want to make sure we're focusing on, again, what it's asking. And this one here, right, we don't actually need a calculator to solve it at all. The answer is 25/41. We don't need to do that one at all. You'll find a lot of times on the calculator section, we don't need a calculator to solve a lot of the questions. And then you'll find sometimes in the no calculator section, you did kind of wish you had one every once in a while. But thankfully, there's not too much hand calculations in the no calc section though, so it's not too bad. You'll also see some other stuff. So algebra is a really key part of the test. Algebra, especially like algebra 2 content. So whatever your student is learning in algebra 2 is a lot of what's on the test. And so you'll see everything from just regular linear equations all the way into advanced factoring like we see here. So advanced factoring could be something like here we see a cubic. To factor a cubic, you can often group by factor by grouping. So again, right, this is not necessarily to review all this content, but just to give you an idea of some of the skills you'll need on the test, right? Your students listening to this and they're like, I don't know how to factor by grouping, write that down. We're gonna look that up later, right? So just kind of keeping an idea of some things that you may need to do here. So for this one, you would end up factoring. Again, I'm not reviewing the content, just giving you an idea of what's in here in the first place. So again, that was just kind of a rough idea of what some of the questions look like. Let's talk a little about test day tips. So your checklist the night before, you want to make sure you're not really trying to cram. This is not a test you can cram for at the end of the day, right? There's nothing to memorize. There's no like dates to know or anything. So don't wear your brain out cramming. If you're someone who gets a little nervous and you feel like doing something would help you feel better, feel free to do one reading passage. That's like 11 questions, right? Keep it simple. Don't really stress yourself out. Obviously, get a good night's sleep as always, right? I'm sure you know that's important. Get your stuff ready for the night before, right? You don't want to be scrambling the morning of looking for your calculator. Make sure you have pencils, lots of extra pencils, a snack, some water, a jacket in case you get cold, a watch. I want to note cannot have a smartwatch on the test. So no Apple Watches, no Galaxy Watch, or whatever there are. It really just a regular analog watch is all you can have. So you can have a digital watch, a simple one that you can go and get at Walmart or Target or something is really helpful. You can't guarantee the clock in the room is always going to be in front of you. Sometimes it's behind you. So having a watch is just really helpful to keep track of the time. On test day itself, you want to make sure you're eating a protein-filled breakfast. You don't want to get hungry in the middle of the test. That's super distracting. Dress comfortably. We're not trying to impress anyone, right? So we want to wear comfortable clothes that we're not going to have to adjust or anything. We're not going to get cold. We're not going to get hot in. You want to make sure you get there early, right? You don't be running in at the last minute. Getting there early allows you to check in, have enough time. You can have you can have an extra snack. You can sit down and stretch. You can go to the bathroom, refill your water, all that good stuff. You can get really comfortable. And then do your best, right? It's all anyone can expect of you. And so, okay, one more little tip about anxiety. If you do freeze up and feel anxiety taking over while you are taking the test, a good little tip is to draw a little picture on your test booklet, right? Drawing uses a different part of your brain than the side that is employed while you're taking a test, right? So it kind of takes a little bit of pressure off that side of your brain briefly. It allows yourself just to decompress just for a quick moment. So just a nice little tip there that helps out a lot. And then some changes, so it looks a little weird. So changes that came up too in the SAT. So there are no more subject tests as of 2021 or essay. And we also are beginning digital testing. So digital testing kind of breaks down. We are in March of 23. So right now, we're beginning doing international digital testing. So any students taking the test internationally from this month on are taking it digitally. October of this year, the PSAT is going digital. And then March of next year, US-based tests are going digital. So what that means is if you have a student who is taking the PSAT this fall, which is probably most students, that's going to be definitely all your juniors, probably all your sophomores, probably all your freshmen as well. They will be taking a digital PSAT. So what's good about that is the digital PSAT is going to allow them to get that experience with the new format of the test, right? And so they're going to get that experience and they're going to know how they feel about it, right? So it's kind of good too, right? So if you think about it, the students in the class of 2025 have an interesting thing. They kind of I guess they kind of straddle both eras, I guess we can call them, right? So the class of 2025, you ideally want to finish your testing by spring of 2024 or summer of 2024, right? So that is the spring, summer before your senior year. So for that class, you kind of have some options, right? You can go ahead and start taking your SAT now and do the paper test. You can also wait a little bit and you can take the March digital test, you can take the May digital test, right? You have some options. So it's an interesting choice for those students, right? And the digital test isn't necessarily bad, right? From everything that SAT has said, it's supposed to be good, right? So your student has an opportunity to do, take some paper ones, do the best they can, or if they feel like they like the digital, maybe they take the PSAT this October and they get a decision then. They're either like, oh, I hate that, or oh, I really like that. And that helps them make that decision. Any class after that, you're pretty much probably going to do the digital test. So as far as that stuff, I would advise not worrying about it too much as far as right now, right? You definitely could take an SAT, right, just to get familiar with the idea of the content and what test day is like. But that will change as we get towards the digital test. Some things that will be changing. So the test will be shorter. I think it's only about 2 hours long. It's a lot shorter. There are going to be shorter reading passages. Oops. You're going to get shorter reading passages. You'll have your calculator the whole time. I believe the writing section should say mostly the same, but it'll still test the same content, right? So we're talking about types of passages, math concepts, right? So just generally the same type of content. Of course, that could differ in other ways. So the question is really about the presentation, right? So if you feel like your student interacts better with an interactive test where you're clicking things and you're kind of going through it, that could be something for you. On the other hand, it is a little bit different, right? We talked about earlier how it's really helpful to underline your reading passages. Well, we probably can't do that. There's some highlighting functions you have there, but it's just different than using a pencil. Of course, we will have scratch paper for your math questions, but it's a little different, right? You can't write directly on the questions. So just some really small things there that, are worth talking about with your student, figuring out if they have a really strong opinion or feeling about any of those. So as of right now, the SAT hasn't told us a ton beyond the format of the test. We kind of know about that and their timeline. Best thing to do is to go to the College Board website. So that's the company that runs the SAT. And they have examples of what it will look like. So that's a good place to start, just to get an idea and see, okay, what is this going to look like, right? And again, that October PSAT this fall is going to be really helpful, right? Again, it's kind of a low stress, almost no stakes, right? It's no stakes for anyone unless they're trying to do the scholarship. So kind of like a no stake situation, just to try this test out. So like I said, we don't really know a ton right now beyond that. The grading will still be the same. It'll still be at a 1600. So that is nice and familiar there. The biggest thing is just to keep up to date, right? So we do offer a digital SAT webinar where we kind of go through the really detailed, everything you've told us so far. Applerouth also has a really great newsletter that as soon as information and news about stuff like this comes out, they send it out. So I really recommend signing up for those guys if you want to keep up to date on this. As far as the ACT goes, the ACT has not announced any plans to go digital in the future. So, for whatever that means, whether your student really hates, maybe they take the PSAT and they hate the digital version, the ACT is an option you could consider, right? As long as they don't announce anything crazy. So again, just need to keep an eye on, and again, especially think about what grade your student's in. Again, that class of 2025 has some interesting choices to make. If your student's class of 2024, so you are about to be a senior and you're testing right now, nothing to worry about for you pretty much. If your students after that, then, it's time to think about, digital is going to be a reality. The PSAT is a great time to figure out what it feels like. And then from there, you can make some decisions. But yeah, so kind of everything we know so far about how that digital stuff will work. All right, and then before I take any questions, you're going to get a quick poll in your chat box. So if you guys don't mind filling that out, will tell us a little bit more about you guys and how we can better help you out. And then, yeah, feel free to go ahead and spit any questions in the Q&A. If there's anything I didn't talk about that you guys want to hear about, I'm happy to talk about that. If you want to go more into the nuts and bolts of kind of what's covered on the test, I'm also happy to talk about that kind of stuff too. So while you guys think about putting some questions in there, I'll kind of share some common questions we really get. So a common question I get is when to start testing, right? So what we really recommend is focusing on Algebra 2, right? Algebra 2 really is heavy on both the SAT and the ACT. So Algebra 2 is going to be the thing that tells you. For example, if your student took Algebra 2 as a sophomore, then you could start testing, you can really start testing fall of your junior year and beyond, right? If your student is currently taking Algebra 2 as a junior, you want to start testing spring and spring of junior year and beyond there to summer afterwards. So that's a really key thing, right? You want to make sure you're getting as much of that Algebra 2 under your belt as possible, because it does make up a large portion of the math content. And as far as the digital test goes, it should continue to make up a good portion of the content. Being familiar with that is going to keep being important for both tests. So it's a good way to kind of start thinking about that, like, okay, this is where I want to be when I'm taking those tests and such. And you want to make sure you're planning for multiple tests, right? So you don't want to try to be one and done. That's so stressful, right? You want to say, okay, we're going to take our first test in May. And then, that's the first test, right? It's a little stressful, it's whatever. If we do well, that's awesome. But we're also going to take it again in June. We just are planning for this ahead of time so we don't feel stressed about it. It's going to allow us to be familiar with it. It's going to negate any crazy things like they wake up that morning with allergies or a headache or who knows, any kind of crazy situations. By planning ahead and saying, we're going to do this on these 2 dates or these 3 dates, you're kind of taking some stress off of everyone, right? The whole family. And again, putting some fail safes in there too. So planning for multiple tests is really important too. That's why we say spring and fall, right? Because you want to take more than one test within those ranges. Yeah, feel free to submit any other questions. I'm happy to answer them. We can talk about test optional. We can talk about score ranges, all kinds of different stuff. I'm happy to help. About the ACT more if you'd like. I'll talk a little bit about the ACT while we're waiting. Maybe it'll spark some questions for you guys just while we're here, right? So the ACT is a little different in that it has a science section, which is a little bit different from students. It's also a faster paced test. So the reading section on the SAT is 65 minutes long. It's over an hour of reading. On the ACT, it's 35 minutes long, but you have 40 questions within that range, right? So it's really quick, but it's less complex in other ways, right? So the reading is difficulty, right, isn't as hard. It's a little bit lower, but you have to do that faster pace, right, at the end of the day. You're going to have more geometry, trig, other topics in the math section. Like I said, the SAT is really heavily algebra based. You're going to get some geometry, but you're really going to have mostly algebra questions. So those are just on the surface, some big differences. And again, a lot of it is in just the presentation of the test, right? Beyond like the different topics in math and just having a little bit of science background. Just about the presentation. I recommend both students take a practice test of both to kind of get that initial idea. Good question, good. All right. How many times a year can you take the SAT? So technically you can take the SAT as many times as you want, which seems a little bit crazy, right? We really recommend students don't take more than 3 or 4 because we kind of find that after 3 or 4, you don't really see any improvements. But you can take it throughout the year. So there's a March test, there's May, there's June, there's August, there's October, November, and December. I think that's all of them. So this stays the same every year. Every year, they're always going to offer them in these months, and it's usually the same. Like August is usually the last Saturday in August or whatever. So that's kind of your guideline throughout the year. So, something you can think about too is like, what is, do you play a fall sport? Maybe these aren't such a great idea if you play a fall sport. Or are you always in a spring musical? Maybe March isn't a good idea then, right? Or you go away to summer camp every summer, XYZ, right? Lots of different examples. I will also say for the May one, it is often during AP test season. So if you have a lot of AP classes, I would just be thoughtful of if you want to try to take the May one or not. It is usually right during the middle of that. But you have lots of opportunities every year. Like we said, we usually recommend not taking more than 3 or 4. Again, we just don't really see much improvement after that. As far as, again, you can technically take it as many times as you want. I would think at a certain point it would start looking a little strange to colleges. Maybe when you start having like 8, 9, 10 tests, that would be a little bit odd. So yeah, good question. Okay, what if your student does very well in the math section, but not well at all in reading or writing? How do you help that kind of student improve? It's a question. So like I said earlier, students are naturally better at one section over the other. Many students are, and that's totally fine. So what I would work on for that, it's gonna be annoying, but practice, right? So especially with the test itself, right? So I would, go out, if you go to Barnes & Noble or Amazon or even the College Board website, they have so much practice material available. And you go find that material and, have your student take some practice tests, take some practice passages. You can also, of course, sign them up for tutoring too. That's something we offer. We offer group classes online, in person in some markets. We also offer one-on-one online and in person in the markets. If that's something you really feel like you need extra help on. But the biggest thing is that once you are doing that practice, making sure you're reviewing the practice, right? So you're not just saying, oh, do 3 of these and check your answers, and they missed this many, and you're like, okay, you're actually looking, seeing, what questions did I miss, right? Is there a pattern, right? Like, do I tend to do bad on the passages that are literature based, right? Like the literature reading passages or something. Then from there, you can figure out, work on a study schedule, right? So if your student does have trouble with the literature passage, for example, they can do more of those. Maybe they probably wouldn't like this. Maybe get them just to do a little bit more reading in their free time. That's always helpful. Maybe they have problems with the questions asking about vocabulary, right? Maybe it's worth looking into some strategies for that. Same for the writing section, right? The grammar rules are honestly going to help you so much with the writing section. And so again, right, depends on, of course, what your family is wanting. I definitely would, if you feel like you have a big hurdle, there's a really big difference between those 2 sections for your student. I do feel like getting some outside help would be helpful, right? So we do offer classes. The classes cover both sections, but if you wanted some one-on-one specific help, that could be something to use. But again, if not, there's tons of resources out there on the College Board website. Again, you can buy a book at the store, all kinds of different options there. We also offer a self-guided program where it's kind of like online lessons at home, which also could be helpful for a student who wants to focus on one section over the other. But really reviewing the practice and thinking about, how do I use this to help almost customize my study plan, right? If in the writing section, I do really well on all the other questions except for the grammar ones, I just need to really review my grammar rules at the end of the day, right? So that's really the first place to start. And then again, try that and see how that's helping to improve from there and see what else you guys need to work on. Okay, how long does it take to get your results back? So most of the time it takes about 10 days. There is, oh gosh, it's either the May or the June test. I'm not sure which one. That one takes a little bit longer, I think, because they're grading AP exams. I don't remember which one, I'm so sorry. But usually 10 to 14 days is the average time. When the PSAT, SAT goes digital, will that be the only way they continue to offer the test? Yes. So unless, as far as we know, some people who have like special accommodations to have paper tests, I believe that will be possible still. But when they go digital, so as a reminder, October 23 is the PSAT and March of 24 is the SAT. So the October 23 PSAT is digital, and so will everyone after that be. The March 24 SAT is digital, and all the rest will be. So yes, they will only offer it digitally after that point, unless you have some sort of accommodation. Yeah, it's a great question. Feel free to send in some more. If you guys don't have any questions, you're also free to leave. Of course, you don't have to hang around. If you have more, I'm happy to help answer them. Yeah, okay, so the self-prep program. Sure, I'm happy to talk about that. Yeah. So the Applerouth self-prep program is essentially, I don't think how to describe it. So it's kind of like a self-service portal kind of, right? So how it works is you first take a practice test. And then what happens is it'll say, okay, this is your practice test. This was your score. This is what you had trouble with, right? And it'll recommend lessons based on that. And so by lessons can be small things, right? So like a lesson example is like punctuation, right? The punctuation lesson. And then what that'll do is it'll have you like a video, right? It's like a 5 to 10 minute video, I believe. And the video goes through the rule, talks about it. Then it gives you some interactive practice. And then as you do that practice, it'll tell you like, oh no, this is the correct answer because of XYZ and stuff. So like punctuation is an example. I don't know, percentages would be a lesson, right? Reading strategies would be a couple lessons. There's some examples of things you would see there. So it's really cool. It's nice because it's very manageable on your own. So definitely for students who either can follow a schedule really well, who are all kind of self-starters, it works really well. It's again manageable because it's kind of bite-sized, so you can do like 20 minutes of work a day. So again, it's good for like long-term prep, definitely. Let me go back to your question, make sure I'm answering all of it. Yeah, can you tailor that for a specific section? So when you do it, you do get all the material for all the sections, so the reading, the writing, and the math. But the practice test recommendations will tailor it to what you're looking for. So you kind of, once you get it, you get all the sections there. But yeah, and then there's more practice tests I believe you can take through it to kind of check your how it's going. You can also redo lessons. So if you've been a while since you did the percentage lesson, you want to do it again, you could do it again too. So, but yeah, so it's really cool and interactive. Definitely recommend it. The videos are great too. It's called Self Prep, I believe. I wish I remember the name better. I think it's called Self Paced. Yeah, how many practice tests are included? You know, I wish I knew the exact number. I'm really sorry. So I know that I believe we have 2 digital tests, I think. Again, I'm sorry, this is my guess. It's rough. 2 digital all tests where you take them on the computer. And then we also offer paper practice tests. And I actually don't know right now if you guys get those or not. That's a good question. I'm sorry, I don't know a lot of details. But there are 2 digital tests, which are kind of fun. And then there's paper practice tests. There are 8 of those. So I believe that should be included. You would get those sent to you probably. So lots of tests, lots of practice. And then of course, within the practice, there's practice sections, if that makes sense. So like I think there's about 4 or 5 practice reading passages. That's like little chunks of about 11 questions. And so on and so forth. But those kind of questions would be great to ask if you want to give a call or send an email to that. That would be really good to help answer some of those guys for you. All right. So, do you have any other questions I can answer tonight? I know it was a lot of information. I really recommend too, if you guys found this helpful, again, this presentation was really SAT specific. If you guys are wanting to know more about the college admissions process in general, I really recommend signing up for some of our other webinars. We have one called Navigating the College Admissions Process, which is really good and wide reaching. It talks about everything from the differences between the 2 tests to how schools look at your test score in your application, the different types of applications, to test optional schools, all kinds of different stuff like that. And of course, we offer other ones too, just on the tests. So like I said, this presentation was pretty detailed, but if you guys are looking for some other wide ranging things, I really recommend looking on our website and signing up for some more of those. All right. Well, if you guys don't have any more questions, oh, here's one. There we go. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you guys for coming. So if you guys don't have any more questions, I will let y'all go for the evening. Thanks again for joining us. Like I said, hopefully you join us for another webinar soon. You have the phone number and the email up here too if you guys have any other questions about us. But other than that, I hope you'll have a great evening.